that my eardrums were blown out because we just changed the headphones, and that was about. What was I saying? I can't hear. Is this real life? Anyway, it goes out. You guys hear it fine on the program, but now I can't hear you. Hopefully, I can hear our next guest. Big fan. We've had him on the show for a long time. He was actually on the show back when we were in the den in Michigan.
It's true.
And I knew him, I think, by proxy from his nephew who had worked in MMA, and it was this whole kind of and Joe Rogan. I don't know, but I like the guy. You can follow him on the Twitter at GADSAD, GADS, 2 A's,
2 A's.
D. On the YouTube, GADSAD, same thing, GADSAAD. Concordia University research professor in evolutionary behavioral sciences. I want to make sure I get this right. In Darwinian consumption. Mr. GADSAD, Godfather, did I get that correct?
That's exactly right. Well done.
There
How
we
you
go.
doing?
I am doing all right, thank you. Well, now you just mentioned off air. Can we talk about the I guess you got the shaft because you have a shaft.
Well, I think what's happening across the West, certainly in Canada, because of our current prime minister, is that identity politics has gone on steroids. And so the Canadian government is now doling out Canada Research Chairs, which is endowed chairs at the national level based on whether you belong or not to certain groups. And that ethos has now trickled down to the university setting, where whether you are part of that group or not will determine in part whether you get a particular professorship. And it turns out that despite my 45-page academic CV, I don't ovulate, and so that puts me at a disadvantage.
Well, that puts you at a disadvantage in a lot of realms. First off, in the United States, if you use the term CV, here they go by resume. Did you ever heard that?
I've never heard CV.
See, same thing with me, Gad. I used to say it all the time to people. I'd say CV, like, what are you talking about? I'm like, well, but a resume is different. Isn't the resume, we kind of grow up with a cover letter and a CV. So in America, to people watching, CV means his resume, and he has a penis. I think I just recapped that for my simple self, but my slightly smarter audience. So tell us about, obviously, your comments. I'm sorry about that, but that kind of ties into your comments about Randa. Is it Randa Jarrer? How do I pronounce her name?
Probably Jarrar.
Okay, so...
Wow, you were way off.
Okay, it sounds like we're all guessing, though.
Yes.
Okay.
We're talking about the woman who attacked Barbara Bush posthumously, right?
Yes, exactly. And while you obviously made your comments, you are against vulgar, horrible, distasteful comments, you also defend the right for people to speak about that. And I thought that was a great irony there with that story. Explain it to people who don't necessarily know what went down.
So basically, she started tweeting some stuff that was, I don't know, maybe a day or two after Mrs. Bush had passed away that were, quite objectionable. My position, though, was it is precisely for such a cretin as this woman that we have freedom of speech, right? Freedom of speech is not there so that you could tell me how extremely good looking I am, which we all know that is true.
True.
But rather, it is precisely to say things that are grotesque, obnoxious, maybe racist, right? So I'm on record many times as a Jewish person who supports the right of Holocaust deniers to go in universities and spew their BS. That's how you determine whether you are a free speech absolutist or not. So while I completely condemn her humanity, I defend her right to be an idiot.
And how was that received in Canada? Your comments and your position, because that's, pardon me again. Like I said, I have SARS. I guess I didn't even go through your airport, but I picked it up. But you're kind of a conundrum for Canadians. That stance just doesn't even exist in that country.
Huh.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely am a rare unicorn within academia. Not only in that I speak my mind, that I don't toe the politically correct line. Yeah, I mean, I haven't received any direct blowback. I haven't received any, angry emails from anyone saying, "Oh, how dare you say this?" But I can imagine that a lot of people wish to distance themselves from me. I know for a fact because some people at my university are very upset with me in all sorts of different ways.
Well, I'm very upset with you because last time I saw you, you were much paler to the point that I didn't even believe you were from the Middle East. And now you've got this whole kind of Godfather look going on.
And that only takes 2 days in the sun. Could you imagine in my natural habitat how I look?
Well, yes, I know. You have no right to your natural habitat, Mr. Sad. Decade Jared had a question.
Yeah, I think something that's really obnoxious to me is just the lack of honesty when it comes to the topic of free speech. Do people in Canada, do they think they have absolute free speech there? Do your students?
That's a good question.
Do they think they have it?
Do they think it's in their constitution when it's not? Because a lot of Americans think it is in every other country. Do Canadians think that it exists in Canada, even though that's a good question?
So I can't gauge whether, what is the knowledge level of Canadians on average, but you're right that you have the First Amendment protection, which is not guaranteed in Canada. I do think, sort of just anecdotally, that many Canadians, by virtue of them being, very nice and decent and all the Canadian stereotypes, do believe that it's nice to not say things that might be offensive to others. Now, that they're not taking a legal position, but it's just gauche to say things that might hurt people's feelings. And my position is, of course, don't go out of your way to be unkind. But for example, when it comes to scientific research, you should not decide whether you do research or not as a function of whether it might be misused by someone or whether someone might be offended, right? If Group A is much more likely to do something than Group B, and there is absolutely unassailable, compelling scientific evidence for that fact, then you report it, whatever the consequences are. In other words, my commitment to truth supersedes your right to not be offended by the truth.
Right, exactly. And I don't think that that's an opinion. I mean, we have a lot of Canadians who actually have come over here and worked with us here stateside. And some of them were already conservative, obviously. And some of them, or they had spouses who didn't exactly know where they lined up. And I realized that a lot of Canadians haven't thought about these issues because they haven't read the United States Constitution. They haven't been taught this in history class, exactly why the First Amendment, the Church of England, why freedom of speech exists, why freedom of religion. We're talking about a province where there's a state religion. A lot of people in the States don't understand when I say I went to public school. They go, oh, I say I went to Catholic school.
Well, when the Sun
they say, well, hold on a second, I thought you said public
publication
school. Yeah.
talking about it.
It's a very, very different upbringing, which is why I think you have people like the Godfather here who are so well-versed and more equipped to handle American leftists because they've been forged in the fire. I know you're dying to tell us about it. That ties into your upcoming book, The Parasitic Mind. Okay, Gad said, let's try and boil this down for a simpleton like me, and again, my more intelligent audience. What is the book about? What can people look forward to?
So I'll give it in less than 3 minutes.
Okay.
So the general idea is I begin with an analogy. So in the same way that all sorts of animals can have their brains parasitized by various brain worms. I mean, literal brain worms, right? Yeah. You can have a mouse that is parasitized by a particular parasite that renders it unafraid of cats. That's not a good thing, right? Because such an infected mouse will then result in its demise, right? So I take this idea and I argue that there's another set of pathogens. Instead of being actual biological pathogens, they're idea pathogens. In other words, they're bad ideas that parasitize minds so that you lose your ability to think critically, so that you reject reality, so that you reject common sense. And so all of the stuff that your audience are familiar with, postmodernism and identity politics and cultural relativism, each of these is a pathogenic idea that is truly parasitic. So then the idea becomes, well, where did these pathogens first evolve? Well, they evolved in the ecosystem called the university. And so I sort of trace the history of these ideas. And then I say, well, in the same way that a virus hunter has to come up with ways either to inoculate people against these dreadful diseases or find ways to cure you. Well, so what are some of the cures that I can offer so that people could not be infested with these dreadful ideas? Yeah. That's the book.
Well, you know what? And I think you're doing an effective job. People like yourself, people like Jordan Peterson, I would say, with the Change My Mind segments out there reaching the tens of millions, for the first time, I don't know if you just saw the Reuters Ipsos poll, I believe, for the first time, Democrats in the United States have lost, I think, 9 points with millennials to the point where it's less than 46% support. By the way, baby boomers were never that conservative when they were at that age, and now they're the most conservative generation ever. So that's actually a good sign if you're looking at the seeds being planted now by people like you and what you can yield in the future. Let me ask you, final question. As a more I don't want to say right-leaning, but non-authoritarian leaning professor in Canada, what's your personal safety like there? I know last time we spoke, you're in a little bit of a pickle. You had to have security officers escort you to and from class.
Yeah, thanks for raising it. So not this semester it ended, but the fall semester, I actually had to file a police report with the Montreal police, where I brought with me all sorts of documented death threats from all sorts of people, such that for that whole semester, whenever I would come into class to lecture, I would be accompanied by a security guy who would then lock the doors on the outside. In other words, students could leave the classroom, but then if they had to come in, someone would have to open the door for them. And that lasted for pretty much the whole semester. And then this semester, the death threats seemed to, they weren't as frequent and as virulent. And so I went back to my usual, habits. But for that semester, I can promise you that I literally was experiencing something akin to PTSD. I would go to class, and then when I would leave and I would enter my car, my wife would pick me up. I would literally have the feeling of, thank God I was able to escape yet another lecture. That's not the way that a professor in the 21st century should be living, especially given the measured positions that I take.
No, exactly. I mean, I certainly wouldn't say that you're out there being unreasonable. I'm sure there are probably a few Photoshop swastikas on you, just like myself, and that's okay.
Well, I was going to say, well, what is the proper protocol for reporting, death threats out there? Because we heard from UT Arlington, you're supposed to blog about it.
Yeah, you're supposed to blog about it. We had a professor at UT Arlington who protested us at SMU, and he retweeted. This is an ongoing saga. False memes, that were actually tweeted out by Stormfront about me with swastikas and iron crosses because I support Israel. So they hated me for being too pro-Jewish. And then this guy said, look, this guy's a Nazi. He was a professor and then claimed he had death threats against him. He didn't, of course. But I wonder what the protocol is there with actual professors, because we can't find out what it is in the United States.
Well, in my case, I mean, at the university level, there is a head of security who actually used to be, I think, a general in the Canadian Army, who sort of took care of my case. But that's and then I actually tried to my dismay, I tried to find out if there was any sort of weaponry that I could have on me. I know that, I mean, Canadian gun laws are incredibly prohibitive, but even, mace, anything, I can't. Apparently, if someone is coming to behead me, I just have to use 911 and hope that they get there fast enough.
Well, or just, listen, with Middle Eastern Jews, you can just convince them that you're Lebanese Muslim. Just say, I'm actually Lebanese Muslim. And they'll be like, where do you eat? Amir. And then you'll buy yourself about 10 seconds, then you can run.
It's funny that you say this, because I've remarked on this on several occasions. The fact that, of course, Arabic is my mother tongue has allowed me to interact with all sorts of people, I mean, who are Arabic, typically Muslim, but who are not Jewish, who will say things to me openly, for example, about Jews, not ever expecting that I might be Jewish. So I'm able to get to the fundamental truths when they aren't thinking that anybody is watching.
What you need to do is just because it's not a lie. It's the implication. What you do is right before you start speaking with them, just roll up what looks like a prayer rug and just say, like, so how about those Jews? And you'll get an unfettered, unfiltered view. Gad said, looking for it when you have the book, we'll do an extended interview with you when people can go down. It's not available yet, right? It's coming soon.
No, it's not. Next year.
Okay, next year. So if we're talking about parasitic ideas, I guess Prime Minister Trudeau is just a Ridley Scott creature. So where's the best place for people to find you right now before the book, Mr. Getzet?
Well, you could check me on, as I said, Twitter, or on my YouTube channel, The SAAD Truth. You'll have about 600 and almost 50 clips to catch up on. A lot of good stuff. A lot of good stuff there. I highly recommend it, and we are looking forward to the book. Can I get a pre-copy of that book? I'll send you one, you guaranteed. Okay, absolutely. That way I'll be prepared when we have you, because Dennis Prager sent me the book like the day before he came on the show, and I look like a dick. Mr. Getzet, thank you so much. We'll have you back on soon. Thank you, sir. Cheers, guys. We'll be back to wrap this up. Bye.